doing his thing as a journalist, actually as an investigative journalist. Nonetheless, we are here today to tell you a bit about our findings in a very interesting project, we think, that we've been working on for a year and a half now. Less Hate, More Speech is a research project into the anti-democratic and intolerant attitudes of online commenters, journalists, and citizens, also elites. The project is funded by the EAA grants and Norway grants, and our partners in this project are the University of Bergen and Central European University. At the center of it is this moderation process we've been implementing for almost a year now on 4 websites in Romania. The main website is one of the biggest sports news sites in Romania, gsp.ro, which has 3.5 unique million users per month. The second one is Catalin's blog, actually. He's an investigative journalist, as I said, and his investigations and those of his colleagues were very well received in Romania. After their investigations, 2 former ministers and high officials were either prosecuted or convicted. The other 2 websites are focused mainly on opinion pieces and on media. So we've teamed up with these websites in order to see how their comments look like and how we can have a better conversation and find basically the better angels in the commentaries. And this is what we're going to talk about today, our first findings after implementing this moderation system. Okay, thanks. We kind of all came together, researchers, journalists, and media people, each with their own input in the project. So basically the journalists were very interested in knowing how they can preserve their relationship with the readers. How they can use this engagement. But they were held back by the aggressive content that they found in the comment section. And they didn't want to give that up like many other publications did around the world, just close down the comment section and be done with it. This is where the researchers came in, and basically what we tried to find out was what conditions were necessary to foster these things that the journalists were looking for. But I think in order to better understand our results and our actions in this project, it would be useful to understand a bit about the particularities of the Romanian media market and how it compares to other media markets in Europe. And my colleague Marina is going to say some things about that.
So we chose to do, I have to get this right. We chose to do something on Romania because we are Romanian and because we had this great relationship with the Gazeta Sportul and Cătălin Tolontan, so we had the opportunity to be part of that. But the researchers involved in the project are mostly comparativists, so of course, our perspective has always been, how does this fit, or what of this we can see in a comparative perspective? And of course, in terms of thinking about lessons, it is always more interesting to see how your findings relate to what other people have found. And for you to understand the context in which we are doing this moderation, I put together this little slide that only has 6 of the countries covered in another project we're doing, which is called the European Media System Survey, which is an expert survey that we do every 3 years, and it's going to be done again this year. And the idea is that the Romanian media, this is what I would call a difficult context for several reasons. One is that there's a huge political polarization there's a much higher political the two dimensions that will place the outlets are political commitment and information commitment. Political commitment meaning extent of partisanship measured with two variables, and the information commitment also measured with two variables, accuracy and argument quality. And you can see on the corner slide is the Romanian one. You can see that even the public television, which is the violet dot, it is really very much to the right, meaning it's very partisan. It is very low in terms of, it is very high. It is very, on the right, it means that it is very high in political commitment, meaning it's very partisan. And it doesn't go, well, that's not something we could, okay, that helps. Good. Because we see it, because you see, we see it. So the countries here are, you can see from the labels of the newspapers, is the UK, Germany, the Czech Republic on the top, then Spain, Italy, and Romania. And you can see that the Romanian stuff is all very much clustered in the right-hand low corner. Only the Spanish system is more similar, but you can see, even the Romanian public television, which even has a very small audience, is very low compared to where you would have the BBC or the German public broadcaster. So one of the reasons we worked with Gazeta is that in this very partisan context, we wanted to have a media outlet which has an audience which is not selected on partisanship, so that whatever we try to do in terms of hate speech and intolerance is not so much colored by a one-sided political dimension, or by one type of political attitudes that lead to that. So we could have that kind of variance. The second reason for which I think you can do the next slide. This shows a little, this shows a little bit differently, that it actually shows how it's the same. It's exactly the same data, but the previous slide minimizes the difference between the biggest and the smallest. And here you can see that in the Romanian media market, the smallest, meaning the newspapers, become really, really tiny, close to invisible compared to the private television channels. So there's this extra problem of the Romanian media market, which is that there's a very low audience for written, for the press, online or offline. And it also has incredible economic problems. In the last 10 years, Roxana's study actually Roxana has studied that the decreases in Romania in circulation reach and advertising expenditure are among the highest in Europe. So they are around 60% in terms of advertisement expenditure, and why this has an even bigger impact on the Romanian press is that although it had a relatively good situation for a few years, it is predominantly dependent on advertisement. So it actually has a serious problem of finding a way to fund itself. So trying to have some engagement with the users is a much more difficult enterprise in this context because you did not rely on them for your survival, economic survival before, but you need them to try something else as a business model now. And the third aspect that makes Romania an interesting case and a way to look at it differently is that this project also has this elite component, and because we believe that the extent to which certain types of discourse are socially acceptable there's of course political science evidence showing that depend a lot on elite discourse and what is the dominance of, if there is a dominance in this elite discourse in terms of acceptability of racism, discrimination, xenophobia. And we don't have time to go into this here, but there is serious evidence that shows that Romania is more extreme in that case than most of Europe, that the mainstream political parties and candidates, presidential candidates, rely on ethnic cues in a positive or negative way in a much more relaxed way. So they find it more normal to label that being on our scale sort of the lowest, going all the way from prejudice to discrimination. And I will give you just two examples to give a sense of what I'm talking about. Is that one was that the previous president has been convicted a couple of times for racist comments which he really genuinely believes are not racist. And that shows what problems we would have in trying to implement the moderation in a place where calling someone stinking gypsy is just not so offensive. Or he said that, there should be only, he put it a little better, it sounds better in Romanian, that you only, the Roma people have, women have children, and all the middle class don't, and they should. That the managers should also have some children, and the other example I wanted to give is on both sides of the political divide, so both this, the right and the left, the mainstream parties came up with proposals to change the name of the Roma ethnic group because it's too similar to the Romanian. And our biggest problem is that we are identified with our citizens who do some kind of crime, and obviously it's only the Roma who do this. And also various policies to going all the way to ask for the sterilization of people who already had 2 children and who live on benefits, which, you know, they never became big things, but there was never any protest from any other person in the party saying you can't possibly propose this as a law, as a mainstream democratic party. So this is a very difficult context in which if these things are sort of acceptable, then how can you explain, or how can you make commenters think the way they speak is too aggressive, it's bad for the others, it's bad for them. So that's what we are trying. We are trying to get the users, the commenters to stay engaged, but in a more constructive, meaningful way, so that leads to some kind of dialogue. We don't expect that on a sports side, or even on a public affairs, more general blog. We don't expect that it will turn into some kind of proper deliberative side that would meet all the criteria of deliberation. But we would like to limit the disruption of and the unpleasantness that is given by this kind of aggressive comments. And the perspective of the journalist was very important in that, because they felt that this aggressiveness of the journalists really, of the commenters, really stressed out the journalists, really also influenced the way their interviewees or the subjects of their study, of their reports, of their articles relate to being covered in the press, fearing what to say, sort of self-censoring both the journalists and the subjects about what to say, censoring themselves in order to avoid a flow, a flood, you can even call it, of negative comments. We started, we designed our moderation procedure together with the journalists, and we started by looking into what they think about the comments. And, you know, we were very lucky, all of them were very interested, and we had a 100% response rates within the Gazeta newsroom, and the majority believed that they would like to keep the comments, and they would like them to be moderated. I will not read what you see on the slides. They really, you know, this perception that they conveyed in a sort of qualitative way was repeated in the survey, in which they show, you know, that the overwhelming view is that these are incredibly vile. The phrasing of the question in Romania really suggests that 84% of them consider these comments to be really at a very high level of being unacceptable. So that's why I translated it as vile. So they would like a moderation, but they were very skeptical about whether this can be done, and this is why I explained why they, part of the reason why they thought so is the difficulty which is real in a place where these definitions are a lot of what is hate speech, what is socially acceptable, are not very discussed and are also very loose. So, their perception in some way was, driven by the reality they were noticing. But I think, and we are quite confident that by the end of the project we'll prove them wrong, not least because the moderators with whom we have been working acquired the skills and knowledge to do it effectively, and they enjoy tremendously this process.
Also because we have some big numbers to take out of the first year of moderation. So what we looked at was the period starting April 2015 until March of this year, almost a year, to see the big numbers for the two main websites that had been there for the moderation from the beginning, which were gsp.ro and tolo.ro. And what we found out was that there were almost 19,000 articles written during this period, and only on gsp.ro there were over 25 million unique users. In what concerns the comments, there are almost 500,000 comments that the moderators sipped through, and out of these we moderated about 100,000. In percentage, this is what it looks like. It's 12% for tolo.ro and 22% for gsp.ro, while the number of commenters in total were about 15,000, out of which moderated at least once were 5,000. In percentage, these for the two websites, these look like this: 40% for tolo.ro and 19% for gsp.ro, meaning that the percentage of commenters moderated at least once from the total of commenters. And we talked about in the beginning about this moderation system, and this is the focus of our main project. It is actually called SIDECO. And this is a screen grab of what it looks like. And this is what our moderators see every day. So the moderation system has a mix of manual and automated moderation. The manual is done by 5 moderators and 1 supervisor. They are all based in the newsroom, while the automated moderation is done through a dictionary of bad words, which means that we regularly fill that dictionary with new and innovative, very creative ways of writing bad words and insults online. And we are still amazed of the capacity of the Romanian user to do that each and every day. So, for example, for a bad word, we would have like 20 or 30 entries, different writing for the same thing. So far, we held 26 meetings with moderators. We also did another survey with them, and we mostly debate all of the stuff that are hot topics or, that they raise questions. The moderators kind of work in shifts. On gsp.ro, the big sports website, there is no pre-moderation. The comments appear on the website, but the lag between moderator intervening and the timing of the posting is very short. And so most of the time, the comments you would see on the website are basically moderated. So they have this option in SIDECO of either editing or either approving the comment, the usual stuff. And the period between midnight and early morning, like 7 p.m., is when the comments are not moderated. So the first guy that comes to work, his shift is a very hard one to sift through all the comments that were there for the whole night. We also developed some rules, not many, but just a few rules for the moderators. And one of our biggest challenge so far was connected to the borderline comments. What we decided was that to regard the comments, if they simply voice disapproval or express an opinion, no matter how they they show disapproval of a topic or resentment, but if they do not attack other people or use the other part that we do moderate, we should not act upon it. And we also instructed them with this in mind to not try and read the mind of the commenter, because that's when you tend to over-moderate, and moderators should basically look at what it's written there and not think more about what the commenter tried to say. And also from our talks with the journalists, we found out that, we also knew that, because the biggest one is a sports website, and sports brings out the passion in people, we should try and not, over-moderate that. We want to keep the passion out of the comments, but we will moderate an offensive and, otherwise very bad comment. And Marina can tell you a bit about what we moderate and what we don't. What we moderate is much more than what we don't, obviously.
Yeah, but more, you can see the list there, so I get bored of reading the same thing we put on the slide. So I will just say that the discussions there, in the 26 or 28 meetings that we had, the discussions really went on how you define each of the things that you see on this list. Because it might seem quite obvious, or there might be definitions, including legal definitions, and lots of academic definitions, but the actual content of comments raises different questions. And the idea of not trying to put yourself in the head of the moderator is important, because when you read a slur, or when you read something that calls someone an animal, you have to think. You don't have to think whether he wanted to say something more. There are certain words for animals that you use sort of commonly and don't necessarily have an equally negative content as others. So it's not, if the word is an animal, it means, if they say something about, all these Steaua supporters are pigs, that is going to be moderated. But you say, well, they are not very smart, or they are not as smart as a dog, then you're not going to moderate. So it's this kind of loose things that you don't try to, don't put more into that. Don't limit what they said. They didn't try. That wasn't the second one. None of the moderators felt it was very bad. But also, if they make fun of your moderation and they say, you are steluce, you're not going to moderate that, because steluce means stars, which you will see now. This is how we moderate. What they mean is they try to, it's banter. They try to say something nasty about you, but you're not going to replace those stars with imagining that they try to say something and delete the whole comment. The whole moderation, can you change the slide?
Okay.
And next. No. Okay. So the important part is really this discussion, and it led from So it led from simple things that were set up from the beginning to stuff on which we really had difficulties on agreeing, and that's because this is a sports newspaper. People use all sorts of colorful language, and if you are very scared of certain strong words, you might moderate them. So this was a big part of it. But also there were lots of, and for me as a political scientist looking into political attitudes and to how you define what is racism or not, and what is prejudice or not. It was very interesting that the moderators, who were very, our survey of the moderators showed that they are very keen on having a meaningful discussion and trying to identify what is prejudice talk. They did have, we had a long discussion about whether slanted eyes is it or isn't it a bad way of referring to Asians. And why would we care if we say that? Because obviously we have no Asians, so we can't be racist about people we have never met. Which of course is not true that we don't have any, and then obviously slanted eyes. So this led to a long discussion, and we had to prepare a material to show what, when this was used and why this is considered a racist labeling, and to go further from just moderated, so we decided. So it's been part of what was more interesting and more intense than we expected was that they would engage so much with trying to understand how you think about this process. So it's not that I had, as a academic in the ivory tower, the feeling that these people will not have the time or energy to do this or the intellectual interest, but rather I thought that this would be much simpler and that we would just do it quite quickly. They engaged very much in depth, and they were very keen to try it on. On one of the most controversial things that we moderate, which is whether you call someone a Tsigan, which is a gypsy, or a Roma. This is a very big debate. Most people would say in everyday language the gypsy word rather than the Roma, but it is perceived as racist. And they really try to look up how people perceive that. And a very good story was that one of them met at his church, where he goes every Sunday. He met a Roma guy whom he didn't know was a Roma or whatever, and they discussed, what do you do at work, blah, blah, blah. And the Roma guy said, yeah, I also wondered whether this is racist or not, but I think you're doing the right thing because I looked up, and when people speak about gypsy or about Tsigan, they really always mean it almost as an adjective of a nasty thing. So calling someone a gypsy is an insult, and it is a racist insult. It came from various sources, not all very scientific, but they really engage in trying to understand what would be the best way to do it.
Yeah, and another subject up for debate was, I need to explain a bit this slide, was this cover of the newspaper, the front page of the newspaper, which kind of replicated an actual event, was a mockery of an actual event where the head of the Orthodox Church in Romania used a paint roller to bless with holy water the headquarters of a radio station. So the guys from the newspaper, they did this montage of, the guy, the leader of the Orthodox Church in Romania, and put up just the face of our national football team coach, who everybody knows is very religious,
superstitious would be the word.
Okay. Superstitious, religious, has this, crosses with him during the games, and this was the cover done for the draw for the European Championship, and he was trying to bless the draw by, splashing some holy water on the board there, and this was transformed into a debate in the newsroom. Those more religious some of them were offended by, the depiction of the head of the church, and also as an affront to the religion. Others, also some of them very religious, saw it just, it is a mockery, but it's acceptable. This actually happened, so all we basically did was, put it in another context. It's not as if we invented some stuff. So this is just one example of, the effect this moderation system has on the writers themselves and on the moderators. They start to, debate more about what is right or what will be perceived and how. And Marina, I think you
and
wanted
it has a very big, I mean, it's very interesting that it has a very, it had a ripple effect inside the newsroom, and then it led to discussions they didn't have before, partly because they never had time, but partly because the stimulus wasn't there. And it did change a lot of the way they think about, what they tell us they think about, how they decide on titles, which they want to have as exciting, of course, as journalism, and it is, it tries to get as many viewers, readers, whatnot, but that they are a lot more conscious about this thing. So the moderators had more than, it was not just them learning something, but it was really an engagement within, so not just with the commenters, but also an engagement with the newsroom. This is just a show how we do it. We've been trying different, since we do this not in a lab and not for very short periods of time, but rather for a little longer than a year, we cannot have a control environment like the Engaging News Project in the United States has, but we can try some things on the longer run, and that's one of the strengths of the project. And we decided that we do not delete the whole comment that has, or we don't mark as moderated the whole comment, but rather to have some masks that replace the section that is considered offensive to be moderated. The idea is not that the moderators or us believe that we should play the role of the editors for the comments, which we agreed would be wrong. I mean, we agreed with what the Guardian believes that would be wrong, but this is not editing. It's just our goal, like the goal of the whole project, is to give a signal that this kind of behavior makes actually you look ridiculous. It's not a good thing for you. Your message will be lost because maybe you wanted to say something else than just the aggressiveness. Maybe you were really upset by something, you really didn't like something, you really wanted to convey some very strong feelings. If you find a better way to convey them, then people will look at your message. While this way, no one will understand anything from this garbled out stuff with the millions of stars that we put there. And we just introduced yesterday, on Monday, sort of what one can call a probably softer version of that, is that those sections become much smaller. So you can actually see them, but they are not, you really have to struggle. So the idea is that we're just trying to make the life hard for those who want to disrupt this conversation. And we are doing some other sort of pointed experiments. One of them, I mean, we have warnings and tags, and we'll analyze more in depth what comes out, but one small experiment we have done, which also shows the value of doing it for a long time or systematically, is that we had, for 3 months, we had one preview message that half of the comments got, and then for, it's in the second month now, so it's still going on, we don't have yet the analysis, but for the second period, there are 5 messages, so everybody gets a preview. So before you can post something, you're asked, do you think this is really okay? And the way we asked, and if this is not okay, you're going to be moderated. But in the second step, we said a little bit more than that. We had the old message, a version of the old message, and 3 things trying to tap into psychological mechanisms that might make people think, stop and think. So that you cut on the aggression by making people stop and think. Well, it's very interesting that it didn't, it worked a lot less than the moderation, but the first part, when only half of the time they would get it, rather than when they were always terrorized by this preview message. And the first time, there are only 3.8% of them ever reconsidered, so it just shows that it's difficult to just tell them what to do. It's basically impossible, because 3.8% is like nothing. And in the second period, it's 6.5%. It's not a huge increase, but it is still something. It shows, if you're nagged enough, there might be something. It doesn't work as well as a more meaningful thing as the moderation process itself is, but it still shows a little bit the power of nudging people. the bigger findings are that over time the moderation did have some effects.
Yeah.
And
We saw some trends, and I'm going to show you now some trends from the sports website that we found out. So basically during this whole year of moderation, what we did was divide into the period, the first 6 months and the next 6 months, to see the evolution in the moderation. And what we found out first was that there was a drop in the number of commenters from 7,000 to almost 6,000 in the second period, but not a drop in the number of unique users. So the website's traffic was not really affected by the moderation we implemented there. And another important finding was that the need for moderation went down over time, meaning that the percentage of moderated comments decreased between the two periods. As you can see the numbers there. And the percentages were something like 24%, in the first 6 months, to 19% in the second part of the period. And when we checked these both findings against the pre-moderation period, we saw that they still applied. And right now I'm going to let Marina finish off by telling you something that we're doing right now.
So it's been almost exactly a year since we started, and so we can sort of draw some lines, draw a line and draw some conclusions, and we did that, and that's how, because we thought that one of the most important thing that came out was that actually the need for moderation decreased. There was no bad effect, which was one fear, because in the early days there was all this talk among the commenters that you don't let us here, you censor us, this is back to Ceausescu's times. Then there was a fear about, in the newsroom and also among the moderators that, they're going to all run away and we're not going to have anyone reading our stuff because of this silly moderation thing. There's this one in 450 people on this site comments, so we do this. It turns out that wasn't the case. People didn't run away, the number of users didn't decrease, but we had some good effects also within users that they really, you can tell if you compare the behavior of the same person over time that they figured it out, that it doesn't really help them if they are constantly moderated. But so what we are doing now is of course we're doing a lot of the more complicated analysis now that we have the data, but we are doing the next step, which is trying more direct journalist intervention, and we do that in two ways, partly because the journalists themselves thought so, also because there's already some evidence from the United States experiments that actual journalistic intervention in the comments, meaning journalists responding, commenting, asking questions, this intervention does have an effect on making the comments more civil. So we're going to start that soon, and we are doing this also on Catalin's blog, where he has always intervened, but just just when he felt that this is just too much or this has to be corrected. But now he will do it more systematically, and we'll see whether the fact that until now this had very little effect in terms of the quality of the comments. So because you could see before that on the Toloro, a bigger percentage of the commenters have been moderated, although a smaller percentage of the comments were moderated compared to the Gazeta. So we'll see more systematic effects, whether the kind of findings that the Engaging News Project had could be replicated on the longer period of time in a live newsroom and not on Facebook. And also, we are going to, Catalin and his colleagues, the head moderator and the head of the digital section of the digital desk of the Gazzetta, we're always interested in having some kind of a direct interaction, trying to understand what's in the heads of these people who obviously keep coming here. They're interested in this, but why is this, dirt still around? So we're also going to have some offline and online, mostly online discussions if these people want to keep their anonymity, but also possibly some in-person focus group discussion, organized discussion type thing, in which there will be a discussion about why the users are here, try to explore who these people are more, because one problem for someone like me coming from public opinion research is that when you look at this data, you know a lot, you have a lot of occurrences of the same person, you know a lot about them, you know a lot about the articles, but you don't really know who they are outside of what they do in terms of comments. So you don't know anything about their demographics, you don't know anything about their attitudes, you don't know anything. So you don't know what would make them be more interested, what would change something in their behavior, but also from the point of view of the newsroom, what would be the kind of content that would be more interesting for them, what spurs their interest. So if you think also from the point of view of the journalist, of how they could tailor this engagement so that it has some effect also on possibly trying to survive, because I don't want to end on a down, but there's a lot of down to be said about the fate of newspapers and of journalism in Romania. So to try to have some kind of sense of whether you can create not so much a paying public, but like the Liverpool supporters joked that, well, not joked, but protested that, well, we are not your consumers, we are the supporters, so that you feel that, these are not your paid, you don't want them as your paid, the ones who pay your salary, but rather you want to build some kind of community. These are the people who engage with your stuff, who care about the same things that you care, so there's something in common. So we're going to try this to more direct intervention and stronger things, exactly trying to deal with understanding more in depth at the same time as we do the more detailed statistical analysis that hopefully next year we'll tell you something about what came out of this, and also from the more detailed statistical analysis that we have started, but we're not there yet to tell enough right now. So that's it.
Yeah, that's
Thank
it
you very much.
from us. Yeah, we got it.
We're done. We're done. Yeah, that's what I said. We're done.
Unless you
any questions?
have any
comments?
questions, and
yeah, in the back.
Sure.
Yes, well, there's always the language problem. So the computational linguists we have started working with are trying to do that, because there's some possibility to do it. It's been more difficult than we thought, partly because of the creativity. So while we are part of that more in-depth statistical analysis, will tell whether we can already observe some patterns, so that one can devise some software that would tell, after how many iterations can you tell that this user will be a nasty guy? So there is this kind of research that came out in the US. The point is that if you get a 50% chance that you're not going to moderate that guy, because 50% is just chance. Yeah. So you want to have a strong enough pattern to say that this guy will be, should be moderated. What we will know for sure is that there are some topics on which there will be a lot more dirt, so you will need more moderation. But who would be these people? It's a lot more difficult to tell. The other thing is that something we didn't present here because it's from the more detailed stuff, but one positive things, but also one difficulty to do anything like that is that from the people who comment more than once, there are no patterns, that the more frequent commenters are also the nasty ones. You don't have a pattern that the ones who follow certain types of stories are. So there's a mix of people who are really engaging in expressing themselves and interacting with the content in all categories of users. On dimensions that you would look like, how frequent they come, how much they comment, and stuff like that. So this is why the programmers tell us it's going to be a little more difficult, because we have this very strange, in some ways strange pattern that we don't have a core of good users and a core of bad users, and then you can try to identify the core of bad guys. Anything else? I guess we have to finish. We
Could you tell a bit more about the second message?
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think, 3 aspects which you tell them. What are those aspects?
So I'll tell you the 3 messages, and then I'll briefly say. So one is, people will only take your comments here, and we discussed this with psychologists, which I'm not, that people will only take your comments seriously if you treat everyone with respect. The idea being that you try to tell them, to make them feel that it's not in their benefit. So the first thing that is most likely, should be from a psychological point, more likely to lead people to rethink is something that is about them, that it is not good for them. Yeah, so they will not take your comments seriously. And then we had the 2 others, which are more sort of more general things, that you should try not to hurt or offend anyone. So you're trying to touch on their, you should not unintentionally or not hurt or offend anyone, which goes to sort of to the better angels in them, whether that might work. And then the third is the idea that, look, maybe you don't realize that the online world is the same as the offline world. So that one tries to, that one said, your comments should not be less civil than you expect from strangers when they talk to you on the street. Unfortunately, preliminary but it is because there's such a low rate of people actually responding in any way. There's not much difference between these 3. But we will do it in a lab environment where you can actually know more about the type of people who do what and for what kind of messages, for what kind of articles. Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.